Well, I'm here today on Grill Country with Sherry and Michael for our continuing series on meditations on the tarot. This time we're tackling chapter 11, which is on force. And most of the time when we start these conversations, we kind of like, along with the way Tomberg usually does, is he'll start with analyzing the image on the card. So that might be what you're used to us doing, but this time we're going to break with that pattern because Tomberg chooses to break with that pattern in this chapter, because Tomberg actually begins this chapter by discussing the concept of virginity at some length before he goes into talking about the image of the card on the card and what that might mean. So let's open up the conversation there.
Okay, speaking of virginity,
There we go.
behold. You know this image?
No, I don't know.
I haven't seen that particular image.
This was actually an important image to Valentin Tomberg.
Okay.
I think it's in here where he talks about he met the woman who was the visionary who saw this is the Our Lady of All Nations.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And he talks about her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just happened to, I opened the book and it happened to be in this chapter, like as a bookmark, which I forgot about. Now this is a cool story I have for this. So do you know who James Morganti is? He translated Lazarus Come Forth, or Covenant of the Heart.
Okay.
And he's a friend of Robert Powell's who translated this. And I don't know how I got into touch with these guys, but I got into touch with Robert Powell, gosh, close to 30 years ago. It was probably 25 years ago. And he was living in Germany at the time, and I'm talking to him about Tomberg, etc. And he put me in touch with James Morganti, who lives in the United States, and at that time was in Boston. And James and I used to correspond by snail mail.
Yeah.
Some of you youngsters not know what that is.
Yeah.
I used to write letters.
I miss letter writing. I really do. I was actually a pretty prodigious letter writer.
But I keep thinking, what's going to happen in the future? We're going to have, in scholarly editions, the collected tweets and emails of John Milton. Right? I know. I mean, it's not that many letters we're going to be able to excavate. But anyway, the story. So I was talking to or corresponding with James, and I was telling him that I thought there was a relationship between there was a red rose cross and a white rose cross, and I thought that the white rose cross was deeply connected to Mary. And he sends me this.
Oh
wow.
And get this. What he sent me is actually not really a holy card, but see that dude right there?
Yeah.
That's Father Thomas Schipflinger. And if you know the book Sophia Maria, which is one of the earliest compendiums of Sophianic literature, it's an anthology. And James translated that, and this is from Father Schipflinger's 50th anniversary to the priesthood thingy,
Okay. Commemorate.
And he had been a missionary in China for a long time. And he was German, but and he knew James through Robert Powell, and through them he gave him this manuscript, which was translated by James and turned into Sophia Maria, which is a cool book to have if you don't have it, if you're interested in Sophiology. Anyway, so there's a little trivia for you.
Yeah, that's cool.
That Our Lady of All Nations, that apparition was in Holland, right?
Yes, which is when it was in Holland when Valentin Tomberg was in Holland,
right?
When he was during the war or in the refugee camp afterwards,
right,
or camp for displaced persons.
So, virginity. What are we to make of this? Of conceptually of virginity here?
Well, I just wrote out a couple key things that jumped out at me. I can find them on the page. Where is that now? Well, Maybe you know where it is, because I was
Well,
look-
yeah, sure. I think, well, he talks about, he in the early parts of the chapter, he talks about unfallen nature and natural religion
right, and
vitally lawn. Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
like he's tying virginity to that.
Right.
And then
he said, and I know he said it. I was listening because I already read this chapter and everything, prepared for it. So I was just re-listening to it this morning, and I wrote down stuff when I heard it. And he said somewhere in the beginning, force is basic. It equals the natural integrity of being. Do you remember where that is?
let's see here. Hold on a second. Let me check my notes.
Natural integrity. Let me see if I can find it.
Oh, right here. Force is the arcanum of the natural integrity of being, or power without effort, because force subdues the lion, not by force similar to that of the lion, but rather by force of a higher order on a higher plane. This is the arcanum of force. So this is after he's a little bit later, after he's talked about this concept of virginity and natural religion and supernatural religion and the waters of the sea of glass versus the waters of the serpent, being swept away versus being illuminated, and all those kinds of concepts that he has early in the chapter. And then finally, when he gets into talking about the card and the arcanum of force, that's one of the things that he says early on. So that's the exact line that you were looking for, Shari.
Yeah. And so, I mean, now we could jump backwards from that, right?
Yeah.
Like what I really liked was when he explains the holy, holy, holy in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
As how does he put it here? I have it here. All beings are baptized and confirmed in natural religion. Oh wait, where is it? Should have had the book.
It's pretty early on.
Probably page 270.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Oh, yeah, there it is. The mystery of natural religion, which is at the same time that of vital elan, which is life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is found expressed with remarkable clarity in the Apocalypse of St. John. Before the throne, there is, as it were, a sea of glass, like crystal, and round the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all round and within, and day and night they never cease to sing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. This gives a tableau of the working of natural religion, its structure and elements. It is the presence which is reflected in the limpid sea like crystal, and it is holy animality, which never ceases to sing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. So when I read that, I thought, Michael, if you talking about Steiner, I think you mentioned once, Steiner talks about holy animality, right?
Oh yeah, in his book, it's the older title is
you mentioned it once.
The Symphony of the Creative Word. Nature is Symphony of the Creative Word, which it's all about that. In fact, in Waldorf education, in 4th grade, where they study zoology, they're taught through these archetypes, right? So you start with the eagle. Well, you can start with the eagle, the cow, or the bull, the cattle,
the ox,
and the eagle, the cattle, the lion, and the human. So, and it starts off very often, Waldorf teachers will start with a short poem by Goethe. Noble be man, gentle and good, for this alone distinguishes him from all the beasts we know. Right. So it's an important place to start from. And it's interesting what Steiner does phenomenologically in extrapolating the mystery of the animal orders, the animal kingdoms through that, and the bird, including the birds. But I like how Tomberg connects it to holy virginity.
Yeah.
And now, and I think this is an interesting thing. In fact, I just gave a lecture a couple of days ago via Zoom to a group at Cambridge University. And it was on Pavel Florensky, the Sophiologist. And in his writing, and a little bit, not so much in Tomberg, but it's there. And in Bulgakov, I think it's even there. I mean, when we talk about, or it's certainly there in Burma, where the idea of virginity is not a physiological condition. It's a spiritual condition.
Right. It's like sorry. Does it connect to Tomberg's idea of chastity? You know, in the beginning where he talks about those three obedience,
poverty, and chastity.
Yeah, I think it does.
It does.
Okay.
But I think
chastity in that full sense, because the way Tomberg talks about chastity, he doesn't mean it in the kind of restricted, narrow sense that we normally do.
And that's what's interesting, because Burma, I'm pretty sure, did not hold to the perpetual virginity of the Virgin Mary.
Right.
Which a lot of Protestants don't, right? Because of that, because I think to Burma's thinking, the emphasis on a biological reality distracts from the real importance here, which is because even Florensky says, he talks about, in order to see Sophia, you need to become virginal, and she virginizes the soul, right?
Yes, and Tomberg talks about that too in here, actually.
Well, Tomberg got it from Florensky.
Right.
I don't know if do you know Florensky's book, The Pillar and Ground of the Truth?
I don't know it.
Let me show you just one page. It happens to be right here. Look, I got a few notes in this one. Okay?
You do. I see. Wow.
But check. So each one is a letter that starts with an emblem.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I thought Tomberg was this original dude, but I think he was riffing on
Florensky.
Yeah, I mean, check it out. Another one, right?
Yeah.
So he's doing the same thing, but he's not doing the same thing. But I think that was his model.
His model for his form.
Informal, right? It's not theology,
which doesn't take anything away from what Tomberg accomplished, because, Virgil did the same thing with their. I mean, what was it?
The Iliad, yeah. I don't, and he's not. I mean, he's covering entirely different. Well, in general, very different topics from his own perspective. But he was Russian, right? So you better believe he
right.
Or Estonian. He grew up in Russia. He could read Russian, so you better believe he read this book.
Well, he quotes. He quotes Russians all the time.
Yeah,
in the text. So,
Okay.
Also, that concept of virginity. If you remember, Shari, we talked about that in our discussion on M.L. Bach's Apocalypse of John, when we were talking about the 144,000 virgins that sing the new song. We discussed that then as well.
I don't remember that far back.
Yeah.
But I know that I know it.
But that's the sense in which those virgins are in the sense that Tomberg is talking about here in this chapter.
Well, I think it has to do with integrity. See, this is the thing. This is why it's so interesting to me. The virginal is, like he says, the natural integrity of being, right? And God, when God talks to Job or talks about Job, he talks to Satan about Job as being integer, right? That Job still holds to his integrity. And I mean, I've been talking to Jess about this. So I said to him, I just had an intuition that this integrity is a virginal aspect, right?
Yeah.
And then so get this. Then I realized that Christ. So what happens to Job? And I'm sorry to distract from here, but I think
go for it.
I think it's totally tied in. what happens to Job is that Christ is born in him, right? Through his pain and suffering. And Christ is only born of a virgin. Right?
Right.
So there has to be a virginal aspect to humanity. There has to be this, like, if you want to think about it as an individual thing, that in order for Christ to be born in Nate needs to be a virgin. So what is virginal about Nate?
Well,
And
Tomberg actually says Tomberg says it's perception.
Hey, can I
Which
show
is
you?
What you see.
Okay, go,
Can
Michael.
I wonder if I can do a screen share thing here.
Let me
Yeah.
enable screen sharing. Hold on a second. Advanced sharing options, all participants. Okay, you should be able to share now, Michael.
Okay, check it out. Can you see that?
Not
Still
yet.
loading. There we go.
There we go.
This, look what it says: Integri naturae speculum artisque imago. So the image of and the image and mirror of art of integral nature. And there's Sophia right
Wow.
there, right? This is an image from Robert Flood, right? So integri naturae means virgin nature is what it means.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there,
And can I think the fact that it's integral, I think this ties, again, it ties to perception, and it also ties to the kind of two-eyed perception that he later talks about in the chapter.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what it
Yeah.
is. It's like, it's the two-eyed perception.
But I
As
don't
a-
think the two-eyed, well, I mean, I could be wrong, but correct me, okay? But from what I understood in here, the two-eyed perception, he equated that to the sea of glass, perception to the sea of
Correct.
glass.
Which is why all the beings are full of eyes. Because they're seeing,
Right.
they're seeing full of eyes. They're in the presence
they
of God, seeing things as they truly are.
see everything, in other words.
Yes.
They see everything. That's why they're full of
Right.
eyes.
Which
right?
is beyond the realm of opposites, which is what we perceive when
Right.
we're through the one-eyed perception.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And he actually made a statement there. He said, death is the price paid for life amid opposites. I know I'm jumping ahead.
no, it's okay.
I'm throwing,
we can jump
I'm throwing
around. It's totally fine. It's no problem. Yeah, that's
Okay.
that and
But
and that time.
go ahead.
I was gonna. Should I stop the share?
Yeah,
now?
go ahead. I think we
No,
got
no,
the image.
no,
Thanks
I
for
have a
sharing that.
question.
Oh, you
Okay.
I
have
have
a
a
question.
question. Are these things all along the outside? Are they in wombs?
They're angel. Well, they could be. I mean, they're angels. They're cherubim.
Some of them look like babies.
They're cherubim and seraphim,
Okay.
and they yeah. Some of them look a little bit like babies, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay.
I've always loved this image.
Beautiful.
Why? How come people don't illustrate books like this anymore? Right?
Yeah.
Oh.
How come
Yeah.
we don't do a lot of things anymore?
Mhm.
What is the Hebrew word at the top, Michael?
Yehovah,
Okay.
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Nice. You
And
get
notice how it
lost
goes
in this.
from- You can. It's and then notice how it goes from Yahweh to Sophia, right? Which is totally Proverbs 8 right there. And then
Yep.
there's this chain that goes from Sophia's left hand to this ape,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
which is the ape of nature, right?
Right.
So it's a
Bridge.
there's a lot here, right?
Well,
There's a
yeah,
lot.
but that's good. That brings us back into the part of the chapter that we started with, because because he's setting up the contrast earlier, very early, even before he starts talking about the concept of force. he's setting in opposition this idea of unfallen nature and the virginal versus the whore,
Yeah.
which is the symbol of fallen nature.
And we call that in my neighborhood straight up Sophiology, right?
Yeah, very much.
That's what it is.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah, exactly. Yes, it very much is.
It is, yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
just come on, man.
yeah.
It don't get no more sociological than that, people.
So there is
Yeah.
one bit that I thought was that was very salient to me that we haven't talked about yet from the early chapter, and it's where he's talking about illumination versus, where's my notes? He's talking about, oh yeah, he's talking about like, again, it's this different way of looking, right? The innocent like reflecting light versus the scrutinizing look. So that which only wants to see things as they are versus the scrutinizing look which seeks to find and lay hold of its desired prey. And he makes this contrast between Plato and Marx as being representative of that kind of contrast.
Yep. And I, of course, I glossed that with literary criticism,
right?
In this, and what Harold Bloom calls the schools of resentment, right? Which is, because is your degree in English?
No,
Nate?
No, it's actually great. Okay, so it's journalism. I studied great books. I studied great books for the most part, and then switched to journalism at the end because it was like, oh shit, I need to get a job when I graduate. Yeah, and then I never worked. I never ended up working in journalism. I ended up being a chef after college for a long time.
That's how it works. Yeah, but
yeah,
but I mean, of course, if I spent way too much time in English departments over the years and reading literary criticism, and there's two halves. And it's right here. Right? So it's the open, the Elan Vital school of doing literary criticism, which is, I think you see that in Coleridge, when Coleridge says, anybody who tells me there is a defect in a work of literature is not telling me anything I couldn't figure out for myself. But he says, if someone shows me the wonders that are there, now they're doing me a favor, right? So that's always been my approach to writing literary criticism, not to trash talk the patriarchy or whatever.
Right. And criticism
because
is
so much criticism is just bitching. Yeah.
Well, he just lays down he just lays it down when it comes to polemic. And I actually want to share that section because this really resonated with me. He says, this is what he writes. He says, there are two principles which one has to understand and distinguish when one wants to go deeply into the arcanum of force. The one is the principle of the serpent, and the other is that of the virgin. The former is opposition, from which there proceeds friction, which produces energy. The other is concordance, from which comes fusion, which engenders force. Thus, enormous energies of a psychic nature are released into the world through a war due to conflict of interests and pretensions, and energies of an intellectual nature pass from a vital state to one of actuality where there is a controversy. It is said truth springs forth from the clash of opinions, but actually it is not truth which springs forth, but rather combative intellectual energy. For truth is revealed through the fusion of opinions and not through a clash. A clash certainly produces intellectual energy, but hardly ever discloses the truth. Quarreling will never lead to the truth as long as one does not give it up and seek for peace. Certainly minds can be electrified by polemic, which can cause a veritable intellectual storm in the world, but polemic cannot make the clouds disappear, nor is it given to making the sun shine. I must confess, dear unknown friend, that during my long quest for truth, I have been truly enriched by the fruits of the constructive work of many scientists by the spiritual endeavor of many mystics and esotericists, and also by the moral example of many human beings of goodwill. But I owe nothing to polemics or polemicists. I owe nothing to early Christian authors who attack paganism, nor to pagan authors who attack Christianity. I owe nothing to the learned Protestant doctors of the 16th century, and the academics of the Enlightenment and the Revolution of the 18th century have not taught me anything. I owe nothing to the militant savants of the 19th century, and the revolutionary spirits of our century, such as Lenin, have not given me anything. What I want to say is that the polemicists have enumerated above have given me a lot of, in the way of objects of knowledge, and it is thanks to them that I have understood the intrinsic sterility of the spirit of opposition as such, but they have given me nothing in the way of sources of knowledge. In other words, I have learned much through them, but I have learned nothing from them. I owe them what they do not want to be owed, and I owe them nothing of what they want one to owe them. Now it is through the fusion of opinions that truth lights up. Conversation, the process of together versing, flowing together, is the very opposite of controversy, the process of controversing, flowing against. Conversation is the operation of the fusion of opinions. It is a work of synthesis. A true conversation always has in principle the underlying statement from the gospel, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. For all true conversation calls upon the transcendent center, who is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah. I mean, Goethe haunts that a little bit, about Goethean conversation, right? Which is one of the ways to find truth in Goethe's mind is through a conversation like that, which is not the same thing as a kind of Socratic dialectic, right?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that, but I teach my students that, and it's a useful thing to do. It is the kind of thing that John Vervaeke has in mind when he talks about his practice of dialogos, which is as opposed to dialectic is dialogos is through the logos. So that is precisely the kind of, and if you talk to John, it's pretty obvious that when you have a conversation with John, like, this is the spirit he's operating in. Whether you agree with him or disagree with his opinions, this is the spirit he's operating in. Yeah, and Emerson, I used to tell this to other scholars, and they blew me off, because the people, they're all about the argument, right? Scholars are about the argument, right? What's your argument? And Emerson's thing was, and he wrote this, an argument convinces no one.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't. It does. I mean,
never has.
If you don't believe me, get on social media for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
An argument convinces no one.
So
how does the truth?
That's a good transition. That's a good transition to start talking about the details of the Arcanum of force, because when people hear the word force, they probably think we're crazy right now, right? This entire letter is about the Arcanum of force. Like, how could it be opposed to these kinds of things? Because that's what force is, isn't it? So maybe we need to go in and talk about the Arcanum of force and how it operates, and how it isn't that kind of electrical force. It's as he contrasted, it's more to do with that the force of life, which is fusion.
Yes, and that's important, and that's why he, right after the part you just quoted, he starts talking about the Shekinah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Which is, and he mentions, I think, is it a little bit earlier? He mentions the Shakti in the tantric traditions.
Well,
right?
he also gives the Zohar as an example of of a work that is a marvelous example of the kind of conversation that he's talking about. Because it's not, the rabbis don't all agree with each other, but they're struggling together toward the truth, and they're excited when things converge.
Yeah, and that's, I think I mean, this is what sociology has taught me, right? Is being present to what is, I mean, you can't, there's no argument in sociology. It's like, there's no definition, because the definition is a is a step toward argument, right?
It's
so
the
you can't
key.
define it. You have to be present, and you have to just experience it, right? And there's this power, and that virginal power that he's talking about through all of this, right? That, which is life bestowing. It's Zoe, right, rather than bios.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he quotes out of the Zohar, "Woe to me if I tell, and woe to me if I do not tell. If I tell, then the wicked will know how to worship their master, and if I do not tell, then the companions will be left in ignorance of this discovery." That's what came to my mind when you were talking about what we just said previously there about making. I think it's the problem that you have with making these kinds of things explicit. It's the problem that I sense in myself when I want to talk about these things explicitly. I feel that woe to me, right? Almost like being caught between a rock and a hard place, because it is Zoe, right? And you don't want it to accomplish anything else. So,
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's really good. Because that's what he says about the contrast between bios and Zoe, is that bios is like connected to that energy that is in pursuit of something.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's, I mean, that is do you guys know this book? What's it called? Dionysus, I think it is, by Carl Karenyi,
No.
where it's all about that. I mean, he riffs on
Right.
all this stuff about Zoe and Bios, the whole thing, and it's a phenomenal book. It's probably the best book I've read on mythology. But he's doing exactly this, that Tomberg is drawing this distinction about, and which is something. It's interesting. I mean, in science, right? So science denies Zoe.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just
Science we have now.
Yes.
I mean, come on. I mean, you can tell me, you ask them what life is. They're, well, a frog does this, and then it does this, and then it does this, and then it mates, and then it does this other thing, and then it dies. And then, no. I didn't ask you how a frog lives.
how it came into existence.
I want to know why it's alive. What
Mhm.
makes it
Michael,
alive,
that's
or
kind
makes
of like-
anything alive, right?
You want to know why it's in your pond.
Yeah, I want to know.
How did it find its way there? Right? How did it get that big? Like, these are all, because that's Zoe. It's not, in my opinion.
Well, so yeah,
you
it
know?
is, but science tells us it doesn't exist. At least the science we now have, the science
Yeah.
of the 17th century, before before what we call the scientific revolution kicked everybody out of the class who didn't walk the Cartesian line. That's what they were interested in. If you go to Robert Flood, whose image I just showed a minute ago, or Thomas Vaughan, or Michael Meyer, all these alchemists, physicians, Henry Vaughan's another one, they were interested, Paracelsus, in this.
Right.
I mean,
and Tomberg is not against science, and like this is actually where I see the chapter in which I see Tomberg and Barfield kind of like moving closest together, because Tomberg he contrasts like how he actually talks about how the medieval scholastics were kind of blind. They were just as one-eyed and blind as our scientists are.
Well, because our scientists are medieval scholastics, I mean, essentially, right?
Right. So both of them were taking a one-eyed approach to the world. So like Barfield, with this idea of final participation, he's saying like, no. It's like, we don't want a one-eyed approach to the world. We want a two-eyed approach to the world, which is the move toward final participation. This sort of integral, to bring it back to your idea of integrity, Shari, it's like to be integrated.
Well, on the bottom of page 278,
Mhm.
it says, nevertheless, life endowed nature is not a uniform and integral entity. It is divided. There is above all division according to the preponderant roles played by bios, electricity, and zoe. The soul of life endowed nature in which bios is subordinated to electricity is the woman Babylon of the apocalypse. Life endowed nature in which bios and electricity are in equilibrium is the suffering creation.
Mhm.
Just wanted to say that.
Yeah,
Which
and creation is really suffering right now.
Yes,
Mhm.
in which St. Paul said that it sighs for deliverance. And lastly, life endowed nature in which bios dominates electricity and therefore is itself dominated by zoe is non-fallen nature. Its soul is the celestial virgin, the high priestess of natural religion. This is what constitutes the arcanum of the 11th card of the tarot. One could formulate it as follows. Force is virginity.
Mhm.
Boom. Right there.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and plus, since I still have Florensky on my brain, he was an actual scientist. I mean, he designed the first electrical grid for Russia, and they let him do that, and then they say, okay, now we can kill you, because
Florensky?
oh yeah, he was a
Oh, I
genius.
didn't.
They call him the Da
Wow.
Vinci of Russia.
Wow.
But he was a scientist, but he also saw that the science of his day and of our own day was inadequate, and he looked to it as a what he called like Berjaev, who we knew, anticipated a new Middle Ages coming.
Mhm.
Which a return
where we
to
are right
an integral view of creation, and of course, this is what sociology is.
Oh,
So in a way,
yeah.
I don't know if you
Which
know
kind of,
Bulgakov,
which also anticipates where Barfield goes.
right?
Like, that's
Because this is what I think happens
Well,
is
that's what's
people who
yeah.
learn how to actually see come to these kinds of intuitions,
yeah.
independently of each other. And it's interesting. And if you know Bulgakov, he's got a book called The Philosophy of Economy, which anticipates a Sophianic economy.
Yeah.
Which, my God, will somebody get on that already?
Yeah.
Come on.
Right.
and Florensky, I mean, and Bulgakov was an actual trained economist. That was
Yep.
his,
That
he was
was
a
what he
Marxist
was
economist.
first. Yeah.
Before he converted. And Florensky is a trained scientist and engineer. And he also is anticipating a sophiological or a Sophianic science of the future. And and I think, and that's when I wrote Transfiguration, I was trying to kind of pull together in different domains where people were anticipating a kind of sociological, they were having intuitions about a sociological future in every domain, in the arts and education and in economy. And I'm certainly, the seed for all of that for me was planted in this chapter, or in this letter in Meditations on the Tarot that I read when I was 23, right?
Yeah.
But he's doing it too. That's why a part of it, I think, he's anticipating, or he has an intuition, because I think it is an intuition of the church of the future. And he's getting away from that almost silly Church of John versus the Church of Peter silliness. And he's anticipating a Sophianic church, which is why later in the book, he introduces the idea of the luminous Holy Trinity, which is the Mother, the Daughter, and the Holy Soul united to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's what he's anticipating, and that's certainly, and I think there's a case to be made to call, at least by contemporary standards or dogmas, there's a case to be made to call Tomberg, Florensky, Bulgakov, and certainly Rudolf Steiner and Barfield all heretics.
Yeah.
According and yours truly.
Yeah.
According to, and I think people try. I don't know if you noticed this, but people try to bend themselves in knots trying to justify Bulgakov or Florensky. No, they're really Orthodox. They're drawing on the fathers. But I mean, you can say that. I think it's not a very convincing argument, because I think what was happening with all
I don't
of them,
know. Maximus is pretty darn radical.
well,
and that's
he's an
where
outlier.
Bulgakov draws mostly from Maximus. That's because Maximus is one who saw the furthest.
That's not the consensus of the fathers, right?
No, it's not.
No, it's one guy, right? Which is okay. And I think that's true. But I think all those guys, you know, they could not deny, and also Tomberg, you know, because they all risked everything on these intuitions they had, and they were all Sophianic intuitions. So they risked their reputations and their livelihoods because of it, right? Because they couldn't deny the truth.
Okay, so this is interesting that you just said that. Okay, they staked their life on it because they couldn't deny. This is exactly what happened to Job, right? He couldn't deny, and so essentially, if you flip that around, people who do that, they are in essence, and I don't think that they are necessarily deceived, but they are deceiving themselves. Okay, so this is what we do in order to make something fit. Right? Like you were just talking about, you're saying how, you know, they gotta make excuses as to how this lines up with the fathers, or how they were drawing from the fathers. Okay, that is actually the practice of deceiving yourself. And this integrity that I keep honing in on is what all these people display openly in their absolute insistence on not justifying, but going, it's that thing, that virginal thing that they hang on to, right? That they can't deny. And that's really interesting to me, because I know that feeling. Like I've had things where I can't back away from it, because if I was to do that, it would include lying to myself.
There's something very important that all of those figures have in common that I would like to point out, and is that all of them remained within the church.
Yes, and he talks about
none of them broke away and tried to start their own religion. And he actually does talk about that, I believe, in this chapter where he compares.
Yes, he does. Yeah, he talks about Luther, and
he talks about
Teresa.
Luther and Teresa of Avila. So that's important to note. And I think, and this is a repeated pattern where someone has like genuine spiritual insight that is given from God, that they won't back down, but they remain faithful to the church, and eventually what happens is they end up becoming a saint.
So it says,
Origin. They start out that way and then they get kicked out later.
Right. Or yes. but I don't know if the book's closed on Origin either. We'll see.
But I think that's the problem. You know, I'm not that we can solve it, or that we should complain about it or whatever. But I think that the issue is, and as Shari said, right? I mean, so you have this intuition about Sophia, and then you have received dogmas. You're like, okay, it's like I keep seeing like those cubby holes where they put mail, you know what I mean? And like, right, okay, well, this one, Trinity, okay, it doesn't really fit with the Trinity. Where does it go? I don't know where this one goes. So you're like, I got this thing. I don't know where this goes, right? And well, what you should say is, maybe you don't have all the right labels on the boxes.
Right.
Maybe,
or
and
maybe
that's the problem. And I think in Christian theology and in dogmatics is that it doesn't leave room for the undiscovered.
Yeah.
Because you always have to find a place to fit it on the chart.
So here's,
it's Aristotelian. It's a scholasticism.
Well, but it's not Aristotelian enough, because it's interesting, because Tomberg in this chapter goes exactly the same way with tradition that David Bentley Hart does in Tradition and Apocalypse to a
Right.
certain extent, because he
Speaking of
says, "Hey, you know,
heretics.
final right." He's like, "Hey, final cause is also one of the causes,
Yeah.
and actually the most important cause, and the defining cause, because it's
Yeah.
the cause that allows you to correctly interpret the rest of the causes."
Yeah. And I think David is absolutely a sociological thinker.
Right.
You know, I don't think you can come to, and because he's honest with himself. And I think for a while there, he might correct me. You know, I think he was trying to play the good Orthodox theologian for a long time, and then I think he I don't know what happened to him, but it's like he broke open.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Well,
And
that's
right
that
or wrong,
that's that-
love him or hate him, I think that's what he's doing, and I think it's wonderful.
So I just wanted to read this here really quickly because I think
We've-
this
This
nails
is
what we're.
ladies and gentlemen, this is the heresy podcast this week.
Yes.
So we're trying to get in trouble with all of our different
I'm
dominions
also
here.
going to say something that's a little bit counterintuitive about David. David is not much interested in polemic either. He will certainly shame people and insult people.
He likes trash talking, yeah.
But he does, right, exactly. He will use
Tell
shame
Fester
as a
about
tool.
that, yeah.
He will use shame as a tool in order to bring somebody to the recognition of truth. Absolutely, he'll do that. But he has not much interest in engaging in polemic at all.
No.
No.
He likes ridicule
grows-
much more.
Yeah, he grows impatient with it and just is like sees it as pointless.
I know. And he
So it
just,
says here-
yeah, I totally agree.
Page 281, the top. One meets the Blessed Virgin inevitably when one attains a certain intensity of spiritual aspiration, when this aspiration is authentic and pure. The very fact of having attained a spiritual sphere which comprises a certain degree of intensity and purity of intention puts you in the presence of the Blessed Virgin. This meeting belongs to a certain sphere, i.e., to a certain degree of intensity and purity of spiritual aspiration, of spiritual experience, just as the experience of having a mother belongs naturally to a human family on life on earth. It is therefore as natural for the spiritual domain as the fact of having a mother is natural in the domain of one's terrestrial family. The difference is that on earth one can certainly be motherless, while in the realm of the spiritual, this can never happen.
So stop right there for a second, though, and read that last line.
The
that you just
difference is
read.
that on earth one can certainly be motherless, whilst in the realm of the spiritual, this can never happen.
And we say a prayer for all the poor motherless Protestants.
Yeah, we're no kidding. Yeah. Though the Anglicans are coming around. Some of them anyway, right? But here's my talk from the other day. Look at what it's, you can't see it. At the top it says, "So let me trot out some more heresy." And basically, well, Florensky gives a paraphrase of what Shari just read from Tomberg, and I'll just read what he said. He quotes, or I quote Burma first, but then Florensky says, "Purity of heart, virginity, chaste immaculateness is the necessary condition for seeing Sophia wisdom, for acquiring sonhood in heavenly Jerusalem, the mother of us all. And that to be virginal, it is necessary to discern one's nature in the heavenly Jerusalem, to see oneself as a son of the common mother, who is pre-existent virginity." And he adds that virginity is the source of the contemplation of Sophia, and the contemplation of Sophia is the source of virginity.
Right.
You know,
so it's a form of purity and intensity, right? Is that, do I have that right?
Well, pure.
Yeah. No,
Like
purity.
purity of heart is to will one thing, right?
Purity of intention.
Mhm.
Yeah, Jesus says that, right? That blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall what? See.
God. But and it's and this is, and that's why I said it was heresy in that talk I gave, because the implication is this is not about biological intactness.
No.
It's a state of soul. I mean, remember Kathleen Norris? You ever read her?
No.
She wrote this really good book 25 years ago, The Cloister Walk. She's a Methodist or Presbyterian, but she spent some time in a Trappist monastery. following their life, and she was really interested in the lives of the Catholic saints, especially Teresa of Avila and other. But she wrote a thing about the virgin martyrs, and she made a great point. They weren't virgins because most of them were raped, right?
Right.
But we call them virgin martyrs because of their state of soul.
Right.
That's
Like
right.
Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Just think of poor Joan of Arc.
Do you
in that
think that
prison as a
was
kid.
historically, historically speaking, at that time, would have been understood like that too? Like, do you think that the speakers who talk about them and call them virgins are aware of the fact that they were raped? They're not calling them virgins for that reason. They're calling them virgins.
Oh yeah, I'm
because
sure they knew. But
Yeah.
the thing is, that as it comes down to posterity, we just think they never had sex. But but it's not. It's different.
But that's
right?
that's because of our materialism. So we're always going to think about things in the most literal materialistic terms we possibly can, because that's our default.
It's also because of monasticism. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. It is. It comes from holding up celibacy as the ideal. That's
what I was going to say.
Part of it. Yeah.
Because they wouldn't call the married ones virgins, right? If they were married, they would never get that title, probably.
Darn. Rip off. What a rip off. But it's true. I mean, I think this is enormously important to think about. Because I think the I wouldn't say misinterpretation, but misapplication of this through the history of Christendom has caused untold harm. And I think,
and the pursuit
I would even suggest that all the weird gender stuff we have going on now, it goes back to Christianity, to a perverse interpretation of virginity and celibacy and these kinds of things, and if you go back to Tertullian, you ever read Tertullian's book, I can't remember the Latin title, but it's on the clothing, the raiment of women, and he rips on women as being they're crucifying Jesus still. He's slut shaming all women. He's
very early too.
It's crazy, yeah. And it's not healthy.
Right.
Well, culturally,
that's the kind of, but Tertullian, that kind of writing, like those are the kinds of early Christian writers that Tomberg is talking about when he says that he's gained nothing from the polemicists. Like that's precisely the kind of thing he has in mind. So
yeah. No, I don't know. There's a sense that I have of what do you call that? Obscurantism. When you portray the feminine, the female human being, in that way, like when you start slut shaming and fully covering, and I've struggled with this for a long time. I've thought about this for a long time because I came out of a Protestant denomination that kind of put women on the back burner, right? You weren't allowed to speak in the church, you had to have your head covered, blah, blah, blah. And I always wondered, what purpose does that serve if the image of God is the man and the woman, right? Standing side by side. But when you put the woman in behind, right? And the man stands at the front, the image is distorted. The image of God is like, and I didn't know this at the time, but Judaism agrees with me in that respect, right? That the whole human being is the man and the woman together, right?
That's Tomberg talks about Adam Eve. He hyphenates it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a single being, Adam Eve.
So all of this, like what Michael was talking about, monasticism, celibacy, gender identity issues, fundamentalists who, treat women badly, like Tertullian, right? Have that kind of attitude. They're obscuring the image of God in the world.
They are.
Think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. And they're not realizing that, well, it's so this way of this old like Jewish Kabbalistic way of thinking about it, or the way Tomberg thinks about it as being like an integrated singular prototypical being, Adam Eve, like that
Yeah.
tells you a very important truth about yourself, is that the truth is that every human being, regardless of what their biology is both masculine and feminine.
Well, it also tells you a lot about God.
Yes, it does. And because we're made in the image of God, right? So that means that God is not exclusively masculine,
No.
just as
And-
we are not exclusively masculine.
Well, the interpretation.
More heresy. Yay.
Yeah, I'm gonna bust out some more heresy, but there's an interpretation, and I did not come up with it. I don't know if the first person, but one person was this Orthodox archimandrite who had been a Benedictine monk before that, Alexis Mensberger, who he suggests, and I buy it, that when God in Genesis says, "Let us make man in our image," he's speaking to Sophia.
Mhm.
Yes, I've heard that
Which,
too.
and wouldn't that change so much
Mhm.
about our Christian psychology?
Yes, because that
If
comes
we'd grown up with that, right? You think about growing up with that image rather than what a lot of us did grow up with. And it would be confusing. And I think, even in the Episcopal and Anglican traditions, right? There's a feminine priesthood, but it's not a feminine priesthood. It's a gender neutral priesthood then, right? It's the unisex, it's like the unisex bathroom, right, of priesthoods. And it's not feminine, and my question, and I've always been kind of like, I don't know, women priests, why? It's like having women fathers. I don't know why. I mean, and that's why I was blown away and inspired by the essay that Alison Milbank wrote for Jesus Imagination, because she is a priest and she prefers the term priestess, which gets her in trouble, because she wants to know what a female priesthood would be like. What are the feminine charisms of a priesthood? And if it were like that, I would be all in. I don't like this idea of gender neutral priesthood at all.
Yeah.
Because I don't like the idea of gender neutral parents either.
Well, they talk about spiritual fathers and mothers.
The priesthood is not
Right?
on the spectrum. Okay, it's on a gender spectrum.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, there is no gender spectrum. There's only two primal. It's masculine and feminine are what the primal.
Got yourself
Energies
Okay, boomer.
are. I'm sorry, but no, this is like,
I know
there is no other category.
Yeah.
Right. So what people are expressing through these identities are just like very specific slider bars. So it's like, they want to have a word for, if you're 80% masculine but 20% feminine, there needs to be a word for that. If you're 82% masculine and 18% feminine, or whatever, just pick a number, that there has to be a label for that. But there never ceases to be, there never at any point are more than two primal cosmic energies at play. There's two.
Yeah, and you couldn't plumb the depths of either one of them if you even tried.
Right, exactly. And they're both infinitely complex.
Right. If you were to actually embrace your masculinity, let's say, as a man, and try to plumb you would never get to the bottom of it. And vice versa for women, right? And yet people choose to jump to the other side of the river before they've even discovered who they really are. Anyway.
But but as a biological man, you're not. But here's the thing. Here's where the gender freaks are. They've intuited something that's true. Someone who is biologically male is not 100% only masculine energy. They're being, because they are part of the image Adam, Eve, and contain both energies.
Thank you, Carl Jung. Right? Yeah. It's true. I mean, Carl Jung.
It's his whole thing,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
is you need
Yeah.
to learn how to integrate the anima or the animus, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's
Because
kind
otherwise
that's
you're in danger of becoming a caricature or persona. It's just a mask, right? Like these
Yeah.
people who either become super flowery feminine or super butch, right? They're acting out of
That's very
an
good. Yeah.
inauthentic way of being.
very unauthentic.
It's based on it's kind of a performance. It's performative.
Yes.
But authentic gender, is very different from that. But I think there is authentic masculinity and authentic femininity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, I think sociology addresses this. That's why I think it's an antidote to the poisons in our cultural environment.
And Tomberg in this chapter pushes right to the core of what those are, what those energies represents. They're the two sides of love, the paternal and the maternal, which I don't know if that would be that would be a good transition point to talk about that, to kind of go over what he says there.
Yeah, because I'm a very nurturing man, but I can't breastfeed my children. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I am. I mean,
Same here.
And to get a different, it's different. I'm sorry, it is different. And when I was a school teacher, these boys boys like to tease each other and rip on each other, like middle school, right? You're a dummy. Well, you're a dummy, right?
Yeah.
And they punch each other, and the boys would try to do that to the girls, and the girls were like, "You just made me cry," and they go cry, and they'd get mad. And
so I found the quote. So here we go. He says, "To honor father and mother is the spirit of soul and tradition," which is kind of the part that we talked about earlier when I brought up David Bentley Hart, of constructive continuation from the past to the present, of true progress across the ages, of the path of life of mankind toward truth. It is still more. It is the very essence of life, of the spirit and the soul. This is kind of what I was talking about with earlier, like masculine and feminine within each of us, marriage of spirit and soul. Because it is the experience of honored paternal love, which renders us capable of raising our gaze to heaven and saying with sincerity and authenticity, Pater noster qui est in caelis, our Father who art in heaven. And it is the experience of honored maternal love which underlies our prayer, Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis, Holy Mother of God, pray for us. The source of spiritual life is the experience of the two aspects of love, the virile love which provides for and directs our steps toward what is good for us, and the tender love which assuages all our tears. Now, when care and tenderness manifest themselves among human beings on earth, it is unthinkable that this unparalleled treasure is not also to be found in the very depths of the world from which mankind has arisen. Here is the foundation of natural religion in human consciousness, and therefore of all confidence in the divine order, all worship of the invisible, and all aspiration toward the invisible. And this aspiration proves to be well-founded. The invisible is in fact neither deaf nor mute. The fact is the foundation, this latter fact is the foundation of supernatural religion and the experience of human consciousness, which experiences the action of grace and revelation from above. Grace and revelation are the manifestation of a paternal love from above, just as it is said on the Sermon on the Mount. What man of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If then you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?
And then he talks about honoring your father and mother.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, on a universal sense, Christianity has not always honored the mother.
No.
I had a conversation with my priest about, because it was in a catechism class, and I was asking about deaconesses, because I know that there is a deaconess role in the Orthodox Church.
Really?
And
I thought they were trying to stifle it.
Well, that's what he said. He said, unfortunately, they try to stifle it. But, so then him and I got into, he's very open-minded guy. He actually wrote his dissertation on Bulgakov's Sophiology of Death. And we talked about the fact that there are women in the church, even in our little mission, there are older women who he even defers to, right?
Mhm.
And they'll often school him during catechism class, which is great. And he loves it, but unfortunately it is suppressed, and yeah, but he recognizes it as a very important role in the church.
Now, even in the
And
Western Church,
you know what I think, sorry, but I just wanted to say what I think really is really important about spiritual motherhood is the daughters. Okay. The women in the church don't have anything. Men in the church look to the priest. They look to the father. Women in the church have no mothers to look to. I mean, they find them, they gravitate to them, right? Because they're women of wisdom.
got to
but
go
they
to a
don't-
monastery. Yeah.
They don't have them. Like they're not called deaconess or whatever,
Right.
Well, they're called mother. I mean, you probably don't have any monasteries near you, do you? Or no, probably not.
No, there's just a hermitage.
Because
But
there's an Orthodox monastery about 10 miles away, two of them actually, in two
Yeah.
different directions. And people do gravitate toward and the nuns are called mother when they make their final profession. And
Yeah.
and people do go to them for spiritual counsel, which is good. I mean, there's a Byzantine Catholic nun I love, Mother Theodora, in Ohio. It's it's only 4 hours away, but it's not something present in a parish life necessarily, right?
no, and I mean, my priest and I actually talked about just women within the parish, older women, married women, who actually perform the role of deaconess in the church.
Right.
They're not necessarily nuns, right?
But they're not recognized for it either.
And no, and Camille Paglia, she bemoans the same situation from a secular point of view, that women have no mothers, right? She talks a lot about this, of how older women and younger women were constantly working together, and the young women learned from the older women, and and that's, interestingly enough, very, very absent in our society. Very absent. Most of the women aspire to be what? Men.
That's the triumph of feminism, right? Triumph of feminism is Caitlyn Jenner getting Women of the Year, right?
That is why this is not the time to press for women priests, even though I think the
Yes.
historical archaeological case for it being valid is pretty sound, and I'm not against it in principle. The problem is the reason we want to do it in our moment are all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is not the time.
Well, it's the gender neutral priesthood.
Right.
I'm not a fan. Okay.
But it would be
This
good
boomer
if
is not a fan.
they could reinvigorate the deaconess role. That would be good. And I think that would actually serve a greater purpose at this point.
And I was going to say earlier, in the Middle Ages and even earlier than the Middle Ages, Saint Bridget of Ireland carried a bishop's crook.
Yeah.
Right. So people think she was probably a bishop. And the same thing with Hildegard of Bingen.
What
Right?
about oh no, it wasn't her.
Much later.
I was thinking of Gregory of Nyssa's sister. She was also quite,
Macrina, right?
yeah, Macrina.
And here, by
She
the way,
taught Gregory and Basil.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
was just a genius.
I just
Genius.
precipitated this Canadian coin because I'm talking to Shari.
Okay.
The Queen.
The Queen. That's right.
Oh,
She's not going to be on the money too much longer, is she?
no,
No.
no.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't mean to bum us out. Speaking, well, let's talk about the Queen, right?
Well,
I mean,
you know,
talk
that's
about
actually-
the feminine.
Yeah, this will
Yeah,
be too.
and a role to aspire to for women, right? Like,
Well,
I
do
was
we
thinking- I
want to talk about what do we want to talk about what Tomberg says about the Queen? Not necessarily that Queen, but
Oh, it's
Roll
good.
it out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hold on
well-
a second. Let me just grab it here.
If anybody has a page number, please throw it out there too.
Whoops. Well, I could give you a
Oh.
page number, but I'm using my PDF because it's easier to
Yeah.
search.
Maybe give me the first 3 words of the top paragraph of the page.
Yeah, I will do that as soon as I find it. Here, I'll actually search for the Latin because I know he uses it. That seems like, okay. Is this the right chapter? No, that is not the right chapter. That is a later chapter. Okay, here we go. I found it. Haha. Okay, so I'm actually going to go a little bit further back because he talks about force again, and then he quotes from Proverbs.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
that
he
long
starts
one?
talking, yeah, that long one. So I'm
Yeah.
this is the section I'm talking about. And this is-
279. 279.
Okay, yeah, and it's because force is the beginning.
Right.
Because force, the strongest of all powers, the force of all forces, is the
Mhm.
unity of 3 worlds in action. That is to say, in action where the divine spirit, the heart, and the body are united. It is the Virgin speaking through Solomon when he writes, "Before his works of old, I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. Where there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding in the water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, I was at work beside him." Look at that heretical scripture. Anyway.
And then right after that, she says, "And I found delights in the children of men."
Right.
Right.
Exactly. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, when I was at work beside him, it is a clear statement of the role of the Virgin, who cooperates with the divine, not only in the miracles of redemption, but also in those of creation. Co-creatrix, co-redemptrix, co-sanctificatrix, Virgo, Mater, Regina. This is the place to point out the principles do not exist separately from the beings who incarnate and manifest them. Principles as such are always immanent. This is why the reality of the principle of the divine is God. The reality of the principle of the divine word is Jesus Christ. And the reality of the principle of fertile and productive virginity is Mary Sophia. Mary Sophia represents, i.e., incarnates and manifests the principle of virginity, that of non-fallen nature, that of natural religion, and that of force. She is the central individuality, the queen of the whole domain in question. She is the conscious individual soul who is the concrete ideal, the queen of virginity, motherhood, and creative, productive, or queenly wisdom. Queenly equals regnal, from regina, queen. There is not a shadow of doubt for anyone who takes the spiritual life of mankind seriously, even if he is short of authentic spiritual experience, that the Blessed Virgin is not an ideal only, nor a mental image, nor an archetype of the unconscious of depth psychology, nor lastly an occultist egregore, a collective astral creation of believers, but rather a concrete and living individuality like you or I, who loves, suffers, and rejoices.
Yep.
And then he goes on to talk about the
apparitions,
including
this one.
Yep.
Right. And he met her too, by the way. He says, "I may add that I went to Amsterdam in order to make as scrupulous an investigation as possible." Right.
Yeah.
So as far as he was concerned, it was the real deal.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. I mean, and here's the thing. For a lot of people, not for me, not for you guys, what he just said there is heresy.
Yep.
It's at least pushes the envelope. We're like, you're making me feel uncomfortable right now. Really, I feel uncomfortable with these assertions, Valentin. But it is. I mean, but I think inescapable. I mean, even when he calls her co-redemptrix, there's all kinds of discussion.
There's
and
no
argument
he,
in the church about
Well,
that.
wait a
He-
minute, isn't there?
he
There's
wisely
Sorry.
he
go
wisely
ahead.
begins by grounding himself in scripture, because quite frankly, you have to rationalize like crazy in order to twist that scripture into the dogmatic shape that you want to shape it.
Right. Well, some of the fathers are like, hold my beer right now, because well, because if you read Proverbs 8, right, it's clear.
Yeah.
We're talking about the feminine here.
100%.
Okay, so
But
There's
so
a-
many of the fathers
And it's
said
clear that it's
wisdom is Jesus.
uncreated.
But
I
so
don't
many,
know. The
so many of
poetic
them-
metaphor of the verse makes it obvious that it is an uncreated energy.
But so many of the fathers have tried, and other theologians have tried to turn wisdom, as found in Proverbs, into Christ.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of validity, even though I don't know what he was citing. But Paul Evdokimov, the Russian sophiologist he was a contemporary, or a little bit younger contemporary of Bulgakov. He wrote in one of his books, on the charisms of the women, or whatever it's called, that some of the fathers, among the fathers, there was even debate about whether or not women had souls.
Right.
He doesn't cite where that source was, because I would love to find it.
The
if anybody
idea
knows.
that wisdom can only be associated with Christ, I think Bulgakov shoots down quite effectively in Sophia, the Wisdom of God, because there's just like what you can't, like, it's just obvious that you have to attribute wisdom to all of the Trinity.
But that's what happens.
You can't just like limit it to this one part of the Trinity. No, it properly belongs to all three.
And that's the problem with these kind of Sophianic intuitions, and you try to fit them into the postal box of received dogma. There's no place to put it.
Right. That's right.
But it doesn't fit. I just have this paradigm over here. This doesn't fit. So I'm gonna force it to fit into one of these boxes. Just get it in there, but it doesn't fit.
Right.
And that's because the structure is wrong from the beginning, or at least I shouldn't say wrong. The structure is incomplete from the beginning, and nobody wants to admit that.
Right.
In any Christian denomination.
Does this have? I think this kind of fits with what you were just talking about here, where he, on page 286, where he talks about it doth penetrate every solid substance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that part. Yeah.
Solidity is the experience of an obstacle to our freedom of movement. Air is certainly not it, whilst a wall of stone certainly is. Similarly, mistrust towards you can erect a veritable psychic wall, which can be an insurmountable obstacle to your movement, aiming at contact and the communication of ideas. Similarly, again, a well-defined and rigid intellectual system can render you dumb with regard to the person who is held under its power. It would be impossible, for example, to reach the inner organ of comprehension of an orthodox Marxist or a Freudian psychoanalyst in speaking to them of authentic mystical experience. The one would hear only what lends itself to interpretation by the concept of narcosis, remaining quite deaf to the rest. And the other would have an open ear only for that which lends itself to interpretation by the concept of sublimation of libido, i.e., for what lets itself be reduced to the play of sexuality. Therefore, here again, there is a wall. Now, there is a physical, psychic, and mental solidity. All three forms of solidity have in common that they are experienced as obstacles to our movement. They are experienced as impenetrable. Nevertheless, the Emerald Table affirms that every solid substance, i.e., each physical, psychic, and mental obstacle, is certainly penetrable for force or virginity. How? By action opposite to that of explosion, i.e., by emollient action with regard to a mental obstacle presented by a rigid intellectual system. Force, and I'm going to add, or virginity, will not occupy itself with the mental formation, but will admit its breath into the heart of the person concerned. So there's this penetration, right? Which is why I think virginity is the whole concept is so interesting here. The heart having tasted life, Zoe, the creative movement of life, will pass its breath to the head and will breathe movement into the mental formation. This latter having been set in motion, not by doubt, but rather by creative elan or life, will lose its rigidity and will become fluid. It is thus the liquefaction of crystallized mental formations is affected.
And what page is that? What page you at?
286.
286 and
286?
287.
Yeah, emollient is softening,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yes.
that's how he said the reason you overcome mental rigidity, not by resisting it in polemic, right? Which he criticizes earlier in the chapter,
Mm-hmm.
but you do
yeah.
it
And later.
by breathing by breathing life into the person, essentially,
Well,
by
let me-
showing tenderness and care.
Mhm. Well, and he follows up with this on page 294.
Yeah.
When he says, and this connects what we were just talking about with the inability of much dogma in the church to find a place to place this. He says, in writing all these things, I'm concerned all the time with the subject of force, the 11th Arcanum of the tarot. For force is life, and longevity is an important aspect of it. The Virgin is not only the source of creative elan, but also a spiritual longevity. This is why, and here's the important part, this is why the West, in turning away more and more from the Virgin, is growing old. That is distancing itself from the rejuvenating source of longevity. Each revolution has taken place, what he goes on, but this is what you see right now, and I think it's at crisis mode. It's like fourth stage cancer in our culture right now, in distancing itself from the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's diabolical.
That's why I think,
Which
right? And the rejection of fertility is part of that.
yes,
The rejection of fecundity, the Bill Gates of the world trying to control that is an example. This is the anti-Sophia.
but think about it. If women aspire to be men, they do not want to be pregnant. They want to impregnate, right? Like, this is the thing. This is why I think it's so important that women have, like Camille Paglia, I too mourn the loss of spiritual mothers,
mm-hmm.
And the ability, because you see, the one thing that people tend to forget and actually want to deny is that women are very social. They learn by participating together with other women.
Mm-hmm.
And they are fulfilled in that task because they need to talk.
Right. What's what
Women need to talk.
Well, I tell friends about, I said, well, it's men aren't friends like women are friends, because when women are friends, they like to talk, and men don't. They like to have projects, their activity like hunting or building something, which is one way for men to be friends. I mean, for me, that's most of my male friends. That's we do those kinds of almost archetypally male things together, right?
Yeah. And women do actually love doing archetypal female things together, like
as it should be. Yeah, as it should be.
Canning.
So there's a part of it, like in the section that you were just reading from, Shari, where he talks about how Virginity operates to overcome solidity. When he talks about, and he's talking about it, how it overcomes solidity in different areas, mental, psychic, and physical. So in the section where he's talking about how virginity overcomes the physical, he says something that perplexes me, that I was hoping that maybe it's actually right before the portion that I read earlier. I was wondering,
where are you?
This is, okay, let's see. The top of the page starts, organism above all the brain is plunged into a state of rest each night, is the first. My page number is 302, but I know that's wrong for you guys because 301 is the end of it in the physical book. So
But
it's so here's, let me just, it's not that very long, The state of virginity is that of the consonance of three principles: the spirit, the soul, and the body. A being in whom spirit, soul, and body are in consonance is in a state of virginity. In other words, it is the principle of the unity of three worlds: heaven, purgatory, and earth. From the point of view of the earth, it is complete obedience of the body to the soul. From the point of view of purgatory, it is complete obedience of the soul to the breath of eternity or chastity. From the point of view of heaven, it is the absolute receptivity to the divine or poverty. So why is purgatory brought into the equation there in this idea of unity of worlds?
Well, isn't it that, wouldn't it be, I thought of, when I read that, I thought of it as, what's the Jewish Sheol, like the in-between place where the dead wait, right? Isn't that what purgatory?
It's, well,
Similar to-
I think it also has something to do with purgatory corresponds to the soul.
Yeah, that's right. So, and here's, let me tell you, this is why I think he says that. And he doesn't really explain it much, but this is my guess, is that the soul is the part that is, the spirit is the part that's breathed into you directly from God, right? The body is the part that it's drawn from the earth. The soul
It comes from
the
the
soul
mother.
is the part that's being battled over.
The soul is the part that sins.
Right. And right. The soul is the part that's up for grabs, which I think is why he's linking it to purgatory, because it is that the soul is what needs to be purged.
The soul is what makes
to be
mistakes.
brought into union with the spirit. So I
Mhm.
think that's why he says that, but he doesn't elaborate.
Okay.
And that's my best guess.
That's a good guess.
Okay.
Okay, guys, I really hate to do this, but I have to step away.
That's
a little
okay
early.
because we
Me too.
agreed.
I have to go
that-
to the junkyard.
No problem. And I think,
Yeah.
Do you
Talk
guys think-
about a buzzkill. I'm going to the junkyard.
do you
after
guys
this.
think we're ready to move on to chapter 12 for next time, or do you think we want to do a part 2 on this one? I know we didn't get to any of the idea, any of the talk about like temptation and doubt and fear and all that stuff. So there's,
Why don't we move on? Because
I
I
think
think,
we move on.
it's gonna come back when we get to 19.
good
for
idea.
sure.
Let's do that. All right.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you guys.
Sorry to
Yep.
cut you guys off. You
It's
could have gone
fun.
on without me, but anyway.